Northwest Kansas Soil Amendments, and I like to pick really long names that sound good at the time, and then when I say it 35,000 times, I'm like, should have picked a shorter name. Johnson Juice, yeah, this is Michael and Bryce like to point out, but this is where we extract all of our compost in here, and so these are our freshwater tanks over here. This just comes off of our well, domestic well here, and then back over here is our extractor. And we go directly from the extractor onto a nurse trailer, or we can go to a storage tank over here. Our compost makes 4 gallons of extract per 1 pound of compost, and that can be applied at any rate. Really, we've been doing some trials with that. We've run as much as 8 gallons the acre of that extract on dryland fields and irrigation fields, and we've run it as low as 4 gallons the acre. On some dryland wheat, and about whatever rate we run it, we see a pretty big response in root growth and root hairs, and all those root hairs help us take up more nutrients out of the soil so we can lower our input costs, which is what got me started in this. I went full bore compost extract last spring. I got to looking at my input prices, realized I couldn't pay for a bunch of phosphorus, and then listened to a bunch of talks by Christine Jones about removing phos, and that was the low-hanging fruit, and that if you ran some biology with your seed when you put it in the ground, that it made that transition a little easier. And so I went whole hog right off the bat and did that on 2,000 acres and didn't see any yield drag whatsoever compared to my neighbors, didn't see any plant health issues. But I was told I would. I never did. And then so I did it again on this year on another 2,000 acres, as well as on 1,000 acres of wheat last fall. Paul's been running it out on his irrigation ground out in Sherman County on diverse cover crops, and we've been seeing a really good response there. And then we also sold about 2,000 acres of extract this spring on various corn crops and milo and other forages. So over here on our extractor, we have to have it up in the air like that, because if you try to run, if you've got it down on the ground and you're trying to take all of your spent extract or your spent compost out of there and try to run it out the door and just let it go out on the grass, this nice level floor will just act as a sediment trap, and then you have 40 foot of hose that's completely full of compost and is a pain in the butt to clean out. So now we just open this valve here on the bottom and drop it straight into this tote, and then we collect the water in the tote from cleaning everything out. And I've got an old barn site that fell down last year, and so it's got a lot of badger dirt underneath it, and we've been slowly rehabilitating that ground with the spent compost. And we've got some people interested this fall when we go to do our wheat. They want to purchase all of our spent compost to put on their tree rows to help with drought stress this year, and try to just add a little more organic matter and microbial life back to their tree rows, because there's still good stuff in it, but not as much as before we extracted it. It takes about 45 minutes for us to make 1,000 gallons of extract, which is 250 pounds of compost in. At the beginning, we fill it up with water. We turn our blower fan on, and we let that set for 30 minutes, and it bubbles air up through the compost and the water, and that knocks all your microbial life out of the compost, knocks some of that carbon out, and it runs it through a very fine screen. It's like an internal mesh basket. You can guys go up there and look as I'm talking if you want. It might make more sense. But then it comes out. It goes through a sand separator after that internal mesh screen. Then it goes through a 30 mesh filter here, and we push it up onto our trailer over here. The trailer has a 30 mesh screen on it, and then my planter and my drills both run 20 mesh screens. And we can run, I ran 2,000 acres this year for corn and milo, and I didn't plug any orifice tubes, I didn't plug any filters. There's just one caveat that we learned very early on, is that it settles out really quickly. So it takes 45 minutes to do this, you pump it on here, or 30 minutes to extract it, you pump it on here, you've got 15 minutes of cleanup, In that 15 minutes, that will have settled back down to the bottom of your tank. So the way you fix that is you just pull the filter out on your trailer, recirculate it for 5 minutes at most at a low idle so there's no pressure on it, and that just stirs it all back up in suspension. You turn your motor off, put your filter back in, and you're off to the races and you don't have any problems. If you don't do that, it immediately slugs your filter. It pulls all that biology and carbon and everything that you just extracted right into the filter, and it doesn't matter how many times you clean that filter out, you can just keep cleaning it out until you leave it out and stir it back up. And I don't have a problem with it once I get it on my planter or my drills. Just the motion of going through the field keeps it in suspension. At the end of the day, I either just dump it out if I've got 25 gallons left, because I don't have to worry about it killing the ground with that you would like if you were running a salt fertilizer. You don't have big dead spots. So if you got 25 gallons left, I just dump it on the ground so it's not sitting in my tank overnight. I have installed some recirc capabilities on my planter and drills so I can stir it back up, or I just pull it back onto my trailer. I use the suction off the back of the trailer to take it back off the drills or the planter. 5 minutes at the end of the day saves me 25 minutes of cleaning out the next day. And one other thing I really like about running it is just compost and nothing else. So if I spray it all over my face, I get it on my hands, my girls can be out around it, and I don't have to worry about any side effects or eating them off of my hands later or anything like that you do with a synthetic fertilizer. I've got the compost that I've been buying over here. I have been making my own, and we'll get into that when we get over to the other shed, but this bag right here I bought from Fed and Happy out of Hutchinson. It's their 1/8-inch worm casting screenings, and that's what I've been using for 2 years to get this business up and going. We're switching over to our own worm extract, hopefully in the spring, or our own worm castings in the spring. We've been doing some Johnson Sioux extract, and I can show you that, or Johnson Sioux compost, and I can show you that at the other building, and as to why it doesn't work in here. This nice 3-inch drain right here will not let a bunch of wood chips through. If you've ever tried to put like Lincoln logs or something like that down a kitchen drain, same principle. They just crisscross, and then you have this whole thing full of water after you're done extracting, and you get to bucket it out and say lots of fun words. Then over here I've got my molasses and my fulvic acid, and I added those to my extract this year just as a food source for my biology until my plants got going. And I think that kind of helped my plants start off with a little more vigor this year than last year when I just ran straight extract. But I didn't run very much of this. I ran 16 ounces of each per acre. So just a little bit to get things going is what I did this year. And I think we saw a pretty good response with that. And other than getting really thick molasses from someone, Bryce, and it not flowing worth a damn, and then we had to cut it, and then we didn't have any problems. And it almost tipping my tractor over, because that is heavy when it's full of molasses, and I did not expect that. Thankfully, I have front wheel assist on my tractor, because the back wheels really weren't useful. It was basically a tipping act the whole way in here. Things my wife doesn't like to hear.
How does it flow early in the spring?
The extract or the molasses? The extract? Oh, it flows just fine. I never run more than 20 to 30 psi at 5 to 8 gallons.
Temperature-wise?
Temperature-wise?
Like when you're out trying to drill it in March?
Oh, okay, yeah. So I have some insulated buildings, and I do a lot of winterization in March when I run this with my early spring cover crops. I've put a lot of drains and stuff on my planter, a lot of drains on my drills, and I'm really good at winterizing my trailer because it'll be 50 degrees all day and I'll be going hot and heavy, and then that night it's supposed to be like 28, and this is all sitting out in the middle of the field, and I don't want to road it back here or back to a building, so I just went to all the low spots on my drills, anywhere I've got hose, and I cut them, and I put quick connects like banjo connections in there or little push connectors, and so we can just open it all up. I've got an air compressor on my pickup. We stick an air gun in one end and we blow the whole system out. In about 5 minutes, we can be completely winterized. On those two pieces of ground, you can see the amount of root hairs and that is just heavier than sin. But you can see all the different root systems in there. And I didn't get anything like that running synthetic fertilizers. And I mean, I'm sure I snipped some of these off, but really what I get from running that extract is all these tiny little hairs that come off of there. I don't know if you guys want to pass that around or if you just want to look at it, but I mean, it's heavy. I didn't want to knock any dirt off of it this morning because I thought it was pretty neat that it was holding on to all of that when I pulled it out this morning. It didn't really want to come out. This took me a good long time to pull out, but I mean, it's right down through all the platiness that I still have in my soil because like I said, I just transitioned to no-till full-time in 2022. And then some of my fields obviously have been a little bit longer, but you know, through the drought and everything, I've held on pretty well to greenness and probably lost everything about a week ago, is for my corn crop anyway. My milo is still hanging in there, but I dropped my milo at 32,500 plants per acre, and so I shoot for a lot of tillers, which sometimes bites me because it falls over. But yeah, I never saw root structures like this before I switched to running extracts in furrow. And we kind of talked about it yesterday just a little bit, but you could cut that cost back some more if you didn't want to put a liquid system on your drills. You could just treat your seed. I went this route because I was already set up for liquid, and I was not set up for treating seed. But anybody want to? Our plan is to go from Johnson Sioux compost to just a straight vermicompost system. We're going to set up what's called a continuous flow worm bin. Right over here, it's 8 foot wide by 4 foot. It's in the mail. It was supposed to be here. But that's how things go. But it's about chest high and goes down about 30 inches, and then it's open on the bottom. And so how you start that is you lay a piece of brown, like cardboard paper, in there like that you get with your seed pallets that they protect your seed sacks from. You lay that in the bottom. You put your worm food in there, just pre-composted compost is what we're going to use. And I'll talk about that in a second. But you put that in there, you add your worms, and it slowly fills up. And then after about 5 months, you can actually harvest off the bottom. It's got a blade that will run the whole length of that 4x8 box and just slice off the bottom layer, drop it on the floor, and it's just worm castings without any of the worms because the worms are at the top eating, because you feed in 200 pounds of compost, pre-composted material a week. It puts 160 pounds out the bottom. And that system's about $7,000, but it's a lot simpler than what we were doing. And then to pre-compost that, we're going to use an aerated static pile here. And so this is where we're forcing the air up from the bottom. We're going to cover this with wood chips, just as like a giant baffle for all the air that's coming out of these pipes, because you can see we drilled holes every 4 inches on a V pattern all the way down this pipe. So if you didn't put the wood chips on here, you would just have dry channels all the way to the top where that air was coming out. But if you put the wood chips on there, it disperses it and still pushes it all the way to the top, but it goes all the way through the compost and doesn't dry anything out. So wood chips, and then you make a windrow on top of that. It takes 6 weeks for that initial phase to complete. It'll be at 150 degrees for 6 weeks, constant through that. You don't want any hotter than that or it turns anaerobic and you get the wrong kind of bacteria. You don't want any cooler than that because then it doesn't kill off your weed seeds or your pathogens that you might bring in. So that'll be made up of wheat straw, oat hay, grass clippings, cattle manure, pig manure, as long as it doesn't have dewormer in it, because believe it or not, that's very harmful to my worms. Learned the hard way. I'm going to try putting some other things, small amounts of like crab shells in there, some C90 mineral, some yucca extract, and a little humate in there just to really round it out to have a nice a biological rich environment for my bacteria and fungi to grow in there. So after 6 weeks, we'll pile it over here, and then that's what we'll use to feed the continuous flow box on the other side. But we have to have it in this building because if it freezes solid, you lose all your life in your compost, you lose all your worms, and I learned that the first year. I thought, oh, I'll just have it inside of one of my buildings, and I had a little Johnson Sioux, like I don't know if you guys have seen Jay's, Young's Johnson Sioux and an IBC toad. I did 3 of those, and I just stored them in my building. Well, about mid-January, they froze solid, and I lost everything in them. And I think maybe we had 5 that first year, and they all died. So the next year we said, well, that really sucked. Let's go even bigger. So that hay trailer out there that's parked out there, we made that into a giant Johnson Sioux extractor, and it held 16,000 pounds. We blew 2 tires, bent a rim, but it worked-ish. And so we had another building while we were getting this one insulated, and then we pushed that trailer with all that weight up that ramp in here, and it sat here for a year. And that's what we started taking compost out this year until we realized we couldn't extract it. So that's what's piled over here, was what came out of that trailer. Basically what to take away from that is there's a lot of different ways to make compost. And you just got to find the one that fits your amount of involvement. Because you can also just compost in a tote if you want to just make like 50, 60 pounds of compost and then treat your seed, because that doesn't take very much. I mean, how much liquid do you put on your seed, Michael? Yeah. When you treat it with...
Between a gallon will do 2,000 pounds.
Right. So, I mean, you can kind of figure out where in that scale if you want to run it in furrow at 5 gallons, or if you just want to treat the seed, if you're set up for that with a couple augers. I mean, it doesn't take much. When I've treated seed, I use like a 30-gallon spot sprayer that you can buy from Tractor Supply or whatever for a couple $100, and I just take the screen out of it. Otherwise, you plug that immediately. I put my extract in there, and then I just stand next to my seed tender when I dump seed in my seed tender and just spray it as it goes in. And starting off with less rather than more, so you don't have a whole rotten seed tender full of seed. But we can turn this on, and you guys can see how much airflow goes through this. When we're composting on this hot pile, it'll come on for 30 seconds every 30 minutes. And that's just continually refreshing all the oxygen in your pile so that your biology are just continually chewing away and multiplying and breaking it down really quick. The downside is there's not a high fungal population in that, but that's why we then run it back through the worms to increase that biology count even higher. So go ahead and pull. I think it's like a rocker switch.
I've never turned this on.
You maybe wanted to plug it into the wall? It is. Oh, it is. Oh, there we go. But you can come feel how much air that's pushing out, and you can see why it would have dried your pile out if you didn't diffuse that air more. It has to be hardwood, because if it's a cedar or a pine tree, they're all naturally antifungal, antibacterial, which is why they're such a popular choice for mulch, is they don't let stuff grow in your mulch, which is anti-productive for me, and that's what I did in my first batch that did not go well. I just went to Orscheln's and bought a bunch of pine wood shavings. I'm like, oh, that's easy. I'm making a small batch. Very, very little biological activity going on in that pile. But yeah, so I went down to Kansas City and I brought a whole dump trailer back. And it took us about a year to get through that. It was like 9 cubic yards. And then I've got all the pumpkins growing in here because my lovely worm salesman, I said, how many worms do I need for my compost pile? He goes, oh, you need 40 pounds. Let's start with 30. So I bought 30 pounds of worms, which was $1,000. And I put those in July, and by October they had run out of food. And I came in here one day to check on my worms because it's my favorite thing to do, and there were worm carcasses all over the floor. It looked like somebody had spread, the stuff you put on top of your green bean casserole, the fried onions. all over the floor. And so I immediately called my worm guy and I said, what's going on? He goes, I don't know, I'll come look at it. And so he comes and looks at it and he goes, oh yeah, your worms are hungry, they're out of food. I said, you sold me the worms for a year. Yeah, well, they did really well. I said, so what do I do now? He goes, well, you got to feed them. And I'm like, well, what do I feed them? He's like, well, it's October, feed them pumpkins. They'll love it. So I was a pumpkin thief for 2 months, and I went and knocked on doors. And I'm like, hey, you guys done with your pumpkins? Because I'll take them. Why do you want my pumpkins? Don't worry about it, I just want your pumpkins. So I brought truckloads of pumpkins home, and we smashed pumpkins all winter and threw them on here. Well, this compost is really great to grow stuff in, and all the pumpkin seeds sprouted. And not that that's bad. I mean, you're feeding the microbes. There's something living there, and they can interact with it. But yeah, anybody I sell this compost to, they're like, hey, did you know that there are pumpkin seeds in there? And I'm like, yeah, sure did. I'm like, congratulations, you got your complimentary pumpkin. And right, and that's the nice thing about running this through the extractor is it's got all those small screens on it. So if any weed seed does actually make it through there, it gets caught in the extractor before it gets turned into an extract. So yeah, I think this plus our initial batch of aerated static pile will run that little continuous flow worm bin for about 80 weeks or so. So we get the first one set up and going. We're going to add a second one because you can hook them up in tandem and it'll pull the blade across the bottom of both of them. So hopefully be making 400-ish pounds of vermicompost a week by next spring. It stays about 70 to 80 degrees all summer in here without any air conditioning. You can feel it's kind of humid. I need one of those nice dehumidifiers we saw yesterday because it is about 90% humidity in here year-round. And then I've just got that little propane house heater over there. That keeps this, I mean, it runs, 30 minutes a day all winter to keep this at about 50 to 60 degrees in here, which is just warm enough to keep my worms active. They really need to be between 50 and 80 degrees in that. They really like about 70. They're about the happiest. So I just, air temperature in here is one thing, and I'll just stick a thermometer in the soil to see what the actual temperature is for them and adjust accordingly.